He read it twice. I watched his face go through every shade of pale. I never thought a grown man could manage white, then gray, then something close to ash. His jaw tightened. His hands, the ones that had spent 3 years making my daughter feel small, were shaking. He looked up at me. I smiled. "Take your time," I said. That was last March. But to understand what was in that envelope, you have to go back. Back to when my daughter called me from a parking lot at 10:30 on a Tuesday night, crying so quietly I almost missed it. My name is Robert Calloway. I'm 63 years old. I live in a mid-sized house on the outskirts of Guelph, Ontario. The same house where I raised my daughter, Fiona, mostly on my own after her mother, Patricia, passed from ovarian cancer in 2009. Fiona was 22 then, old enough to grieve without needing me to hold her hand every minute, but young enough that the loss carved something permanent into her that I could always see, even when she smiled. I retired early from municipal engineering, 31 years, with the region of Waterloo, managing infrastructure projects most people never think about until a road buckles or a pipe bursts. I was good at my work, patient, methodical. I understood that the most important part of any structure is what you cannot see the foundation, the load-bearing elements hidden behind walls. I've thought about that a lot these past few years, about what holds things up and what quietly destroys them from the inside. After I retired, I filled my time reasonably well. I have a woodworking shop in the garage. I volunteer 2 mornings a week with a literacy program at the local library. I call my sister Margaret in Victoria every Sunday. And until 3 years ago, I spent most Sunday afternoons with my grandchildren, Oliver, who is now 9, and Lily, who just turned 6 in January. I know their favorite colors, their favorite books, the exact way Oliver likes his grilled cheese, no crust, 3 diagonal cuts, not one. And the song Lily asks me to sing when she can't sleep, which is an old Gordon Lightfoot tune I adapted slightly so the words made sense to a 5-year-old. I know these things because I was there. Consistently, reliably, every Sunday, and sometimes Wednesdays too, and every school holiday where Fiona needed an extra pair of hands. I was there because that is what you do. Because family is not a transaction. Because my grandchildren are 2 of the most important people in my life, and I never once thought I would need a lawyer to tell me I had the right to say so. I should have seen Marcus coming. In fairness, I think some part of me did. But when your daughter is happy, or when she looks happy, which is a different thing entirely, you want to believe it. Fiona met Marcus Beaumont at a work conference in Toronto in the autumn of 2018. He was in sales, mid-level pharmaceutical, the kind of position that comes with a company car and a confidence that can read as competence until you spend enough time around it. He was 41 then. Fiona was 31. He was charming in the way that some men are charming, attentive, quick with a compliment, good at reading a room and adjusting himself to fit it. They dated for 14 months. He proposed on a Thursday, which I always thought was a slightly odd choice, though I didn't say so. They were married in June of 2020, a small ceremony because of the pandemic restrictions, just immediate family and close friends in the backyard of a rented property near Elora. I gave a toast. I meant every word of it. I told Marcus I was glad to have him as a son-in-law, and I was, or I was trying to be. Oliver was born in October of 2019, before the wedding. Fiona had been pregnant at the engagement, which Marcus had not initially been pleased about, though he came around. That timeline matters, and I'll come back to it. Lily was born in January of 2020, a second pregnancy that had come faster than either of them expected. 2 children under 1. A wedding in the middle of a global pandemic. I won't pretend it wasn't a stressful period, but I was there. Every time Fiona needed help, I drove the 45 minutes from Guelph. I brought food. I took Oliver for walks so she could rest. I did what parents do when their children need them. The first time I noticed something wrong was Christmas of 2020. It was a small thing. I'd brought the children's gifts early. Oliver was 14 months old, Lily just 10 weeks, so it was more about the parents having things wrapped and under a tree than the children understanding what Christmas meant. I stayed for about 2 hours. When I got up to leave, Marcus walked me to the door, and as I was pulling on my coat, he said, very casually, "We're thinking the visits might work better if they're a bit more scheduled going forward. Fiona gets overwhelmed." I said that made sense. I said I was happy to call ahead. I said whatever you say when someone tells you something reasonable sounding that lands in your chest, like a pebble dropping into deep water. You don't hear the splash until much later. I called ahead after that. Always. I texted the night before. I confirmed the morning of. I was considerate. I was careful. I now understand, already training myself to make myself smaller. By the spring of 2021, the visits had quietly shifted. They were shorter. Marcus was usually home on Sundays, which I hadn't expected. He'd previously worked a lot of weekends. He would sit in the living room while I visited, not participating in conversation, just present in the way that a surveillance camera is present. Fiona was quieter. She laughed at the right moments, but there was a slight delay in it, like a translation was happening somewhere between her brain and her mouth. I want to be careful here not to sound like I was looking for problems. I genuinely wasn't. I am not a man who assumes the worst. My instinct, when I noticed these things, was to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. Maybe Marcus had had a difficult week. Maybe Fiona was tired. Maybe I was projecting something onto a situation that was simply ordinary married life. I made excuses for a long time. Longer than I should have. In September of 2021, Marcus called me directly, which was unusual. He typically communicated through Fiona and told me that they were reassessing the family schedule, and that for the time being, Sunday visits would be once a month rather than weekly. He said the children were in a more structured routine, and that frequent, unplanned family visits disrupted that. I said my visits were planned. I said I always called ahead. He said he understood that, but the frequency was the issue, and that they felt once a month was healthier. I asked if I could speak to Fiona. He said she was putting the kids down and couldn't come to the phone right now. I sat in my woodworking shop for about an hour after that call, looking at a half-finished rocking horse I'd been building for Oliver. I didn't touch it for 3 weeks. I should tell you about Oliver and Lily during this time, because they are not background details. In this story, they are the entire reason the story exists. Oliver, by the age of 2, already had opinions about everything. He was the kind of child who asked, but why? Not to be difficult, but because he genuinely wanted to understand the logic of the world. He loved trains with a specific intensity, and he and I had built an entire layout in my garage over the course of many Sunday afternoons, track by track, station by tiny station. When the visits became monthly, he would ask Fiona when Grandpa was coming. She told me this on the phone, in a low voice, when Marcus wasn't home. She said Oliver had started keeping account of the days. Lily was still very small during this period. But she knew my voice. When I arrived, she would reach for me from wherever she was with the kind of whole-body certainty that small children have when they feel safe with someone. I don't know how to explain what it means to have a child reach for you like that. I only know what it felt like to have the visits when those reaches became shorter, less frequent, and eventually for a period of several months almost absent. By early 2022, I was seeing the children perhaps once every 6 weeks, sometimes less. The reasons were always different. Oliver had a cold. Lily was sleeping off a hard night. Marcus had work colleagues visiting. Fiona was exhausted. Each reason was individually reasonable. Together, they formed a wall I couldn't quite see the top of. Then came the Tuesday in October, when Fiona called me from a parking lot. She had driven to the No Frills on Stone Road after putting the children to bed, because it was the only place she could think of to go where Marcus wouldn't question why she was there. She bought a bag of frozen peas she didn't need. She sat in the car and called me. She talked for almost 40 minutes. She talked about how Marcus monitored her phone, how he had, over the course of 2 years, gradually cut her off from her closest friends. Always with a plausible reason. This one was a bad influence. That one stirred up drama. Another one didn't respect their boundaries as a couple. She talked about how he managed the household finances in a way that left her with no independent access to money above a small weekly amount he considered reasonable for her expenses. She talked about how, when she disagreed with him on anything, even small things, the atmosphere in the house became so cold and so heavy that she had learned to simply not disagree. She cried quietly the whole time. The kind of crying that has been compressed for so long it comes out sideways, barely audible. I held the phone and I listened and I kept my voice very steady because I knew that if I let her hear how angry I was, she might feel like she had done something wrong by calling me. I said, "You haven't done anything wrong." She said, "I know." She didn't sound like she knew. I asked her if she was safe, physically. She said yes. It wasn't that. It was more like, and she paused for a long time here, more like being slowly convinced, over years, that you are less capable than you are, that your instincts can't be trusted, that the people who love you are problems to be managed. I knew then what I was dealing with. I had read enough to understand the pattern, even if I hadn't wanted to name it before. This wasn't a difficult husband or a rough patch in a marriage. This was something more deliberate, more systematic. I asked her if she wanted help. She said she wasn't ready, that the children needed stability, that she was working on a plan, but she needed time. I told her I would wait. I told her I wasn't going anywhere. What I did not tell her was that I had already decided to stop waiting passively and start paying attention very carefully. In November of 2022, Marcus texted me. Not called, texted. The message was 2 paragraphs long. It explained that he and Fiona had discussed their family boundaries and determined that my presence in the children's lives had been creating confusion around authority and routine. He wrote that he respected my role as a grandfather, but that moving forward, visits would need to be formalized and would require a reasonable contribution to household costs, given that I was, in his words, utilizing the family's time and resources. He named a figure, $800 per visit. I read it 3 times. I set the phone down on my kitchen counter. I looked out the window at the backyard. At the bird feeder Patricia had picked out the winter before she got sick, which I have refilled faithfully every week for 14 years. $800 to see my grandchildren. I picked up the phone. I did not call Marcus. I called my lawyer. Her name is Sandra Whitmore. She practices family law out of an office on Wyndham Street in Guelph, and she has the particular quality of stillness that the best lawyers have, the sense that she has heard everything and been surprised by very little. I told her the situation from the beginning. All of it. The gradual reduction in visits, the monitoring of Fiona, the financial control, the text message with the payment demand. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Did you know that Ontario recognizes grandparents' rights under the Children's Law Reform Act?" I said I had read something about it but didn't know the specifics. She explained. Under Ontario law, a grandparent can apply to the court for access to a grandchild if that access is being unreasonably denied. The court's primary consideration is the best interests of the child. A consistent, loving relationship with a grandparent, documented and demonstrated, carries significant weight. The payment demand, in writing, would be considered relevant evidence of the nature of the barrier being created. She also asked me about the house. I told her. When Marcus and Fiona had bought their home in 2021, they had been short on the down payment. I had given them $60,000, transferred directly and documented as a loan, not a gift, because I'd consulted an accountant who advised me to treat it formally for both our protections. We had signed a simple loan agreement. The repayment terms were loose, no fixed schedule, no interest, because I hadn't wanted it to feel transactional. I had trusted that when they were in a position to repay me, they would. In 2 years, they had not made a single payment. Marcus had not once raised the subject. Sandra Whitmore looked at her notes for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Calloway, I want you to understand something. You are not a man without options." I spent the next 4 months doing everything she advised. I kept records of every text, every call, every attempt to arrange a visit, and the reason given for why it couldn't happen. I documented the dates I had last seen Oliver and Lily, and the length of each visit. I kept a quiet, factual log, not emotional, not accusatory, just dates and times and what was said. In February of 2023, Marcus texted again. The $800 per visit, he said, had apparently not been communicated clearly. The actual figure he had in mind was different. He wanted $1,200 per visit, and he now wanted it formalized as a monthly arrangement, a flat fee for access, regardless of how many visits occurred, to cover what he called the ongoing impact on our family's schedule and resources. $1,200 a month. To see my grandchildren. I texted back one sentence. Understood. I'll be in touch. Then I called Sandra. She filed the application for grandparent access 2 weeks later. At the same time, she sent a formal demand letter regarding the outstanding loan, $60,000, with interest calculated at the Bank of Canada prime rate from the date of transfer, as she was entitled to do under the written agreement, which Marcus had apparently not read carefully. The total, with interest, was $64,312. We requested repayment within 30 days. Marcus asked to meet me in person. We met at a Tim Hortons on Stone Road, which felt appropriately Canadian and appropriately neutral. He arrived in his company car, looking the way men like him look when the world has briefly stopped cooperating, still polished on the surface, but with something tight and brittle underneath it. He sat down across from me. He had printed the demand letter and brought it in a folder. He set it on the table between us like a formal complaint. "You're suing your own family," he said. "I'm requesting repayment of a documented loan," I said. "That's not a lawsuit. It's a debt." He said the timing was suspicious. He said I was clearly doing this to cause problems in their marriage. He said I had always undermined him, always inserted myself where I wasn't wanted, always made Fiona feel like she needed to choose between her husband and her father. I let him talk. I've learned, over 63 years, that men like Marcus need to believe they're dominating a conversation even when they're losing it. There's no point interrupting. You just let the words run out. When he stopped, I said, "Marcus, I have a text from you asking me to pay $800 to visit my grandchildren. I have a second text asking me to pay $1,200. I have a record of 41 attempted visits over 14 months, of which 11 were accommodated, most for less than 90 minutes. I have a loan agreement signed by both of you for $60,000, with 0 payments received. And I have a legal application filed with the Ontario Superior Court of Justice for grandparent access." I paused. "I'm not here to fight with you. I'm here because Oliver asked Fiona last week when Grandpa was coming, and she didn't have an answer for him, and I'd like to be able to give him one." Something shifted in his face. It was very slight. The brittleness cracked just a little at the edges. He said, "The loan we didn't think you actually expected. I have it in writing," I said. "We both do." He looked at the folder. He looked at me. He looked out the window at the parking lot. "What do you want?" he said. I told him. I wanted consistent, predictable access to my grandchildren, not at my convenience and not at his whim, but on a fixed schedule that both households could rely on. I wanted Sunday afternoons, every 2 weeks. I wanted the ability to attend school events and the children's activities without requiring special approval. I wanted the loan addressed, not necessarily repaid in full, immediately, because I understood their finances, but acknowledged, put on a real schedule, with real payments. And I wanted it in writing. He stared at me for a long moment. "And if I don't agree, then we go to court," I said. "And a judge decides what's in the best interests of Oliver and Lily. And everything, the texts, the loan, the visit records, becomes part of that proceeding." He didn't answer right away. I drank my coffee. I waited. When a man like Marcus realizes the architecture of control he's built has load-bearing elements he missed, there's a particular silence that follows. I recognized it. It's the silence of someone recalculating. He agreed. Not gracefully, not with anything resembling goodwill, but he agreed. Sandra drew up a parenting access agreement for the grandparent access schedule. It wasn't technically required. The court application was still open, and could be resumed if the agreement wasn't honored, but having it signed and dated created a record that carried weight. Marcus signed it on a Wednesday afternoon in March. Fiona signed it too, and when she handed back the pen, she looked at me across the table with an expression I recognized from when she was a little girl, the look she'd give me after something frightening had passed, where relief and exhaustion arrive at exactly the same moment. The loan repayment schedule was formalized as an amendment to the original agreement. Monthly payments beginning in April. Realistic, but real. The first Sunday in April, I picked up Oliver and Lily at 2 in the afternoon. Oliver ran to the car. He was wearing a shirt with a train on it, and he talked for the entire 45-minute drive to my house about a documentary he'd watched about the Canadian Pacific Railway. I said very little. I just drove and listened, and felt something loosen in my chest that had been clenched tight for longer than I wanted to admit. Lily fell asleep in the car seat 10 minutes from Guelph, the way she always does, with her mouth slightly open and one hand curled around the strap. I carried her inside. She woke up in the hallway, looked at the house, looked at me, and said, "Grandpa's house." "Grandpa's house," I said. She put her head back down on my shoulder. We spent the afternoon in the backyard. Oliver helped me check the train layout in the garage, which had been waiting, patient, and dusty, for almost 2 years. We repaired a section of track that had come loose. Lily collected rocks from the garden path and organized them by size on the porch steps with the serious concentration of someone doing genuinely important work. At one point, I sat on the back steps and watched them both, and I thought about Patricia, about what she would have made of all of this. She was a quieter person than me, more inclined to forgiveness, less inclined to confrontation. But she was also the person who taught me that the most important thing you can give a child is the security of knowing someone will not disappear. That love, to mean anything, must be dependable. I like to think she would have understood why I did what I did. I like to think she would have approved. Fiona called me in May, on a Sunday evening after I had dropped the children home. She was outside. I could hear the neighborhood sounds, birds, a lawnmower somewhere down the street. She said, "Dad, I want you to know I'm working on something." I knew what she meant. I didn't push. I just said I was there. She said, "I know. You've always been there." There was a pause. Then she said, "I'm sorry it took me so long to see it clearly." I told her there was nothing to be sorry for, that these things take the time they take, that she had protected her children through a very difficult period, and that was no small thing. She was quiet for a moment. "Oliver told me he wants to learn woodworking," she said. "He asked if you'd teach him." I said I had been hoping he'd ask. She laughed. It was a real laugh. No delay, no translation happening somewhere behind it. Just my daughter, laughing. I have thought a great deal about what I would say if someone asked me what I learned from all of this. Not advice. Exactly. I am cautious about advice, because every family is its own particular architecture, with its own load points and its own weaknesses, and what holds one structure together can be entirely wrong for another. But there are a few things I believe to be true, and I'll say them plainly. Grandparents have rights, not theoretical, not sentimental legal rights, in Ontario and in every province, to apply for access when a meaningful relationship with a grandchild is being unreasonably denied. These rights exist because the law recognizes something that should be obvious but sometimes needs to be stated formally. A grandparent who has been a consistent, loving presence in a child's life is not a convenience to be scheduled or a problem to be managed. They are a relationship, and that relationship belongs, in the most important sense, not to the parents, but to the child. If you are in this situation, if you are a grandparent being slowly edged out of your grandchildren's lives, whether through payment demands or scheduling manipulation or the quiet accumulation of reasons why today isn't a good day, I want you to know that you are not without options. Document everything. Keep records. Call a family lawyer before you assume there is nothing to be done. The law may surprise you. I also want to say something about financial agreements within families, because the $60,000 was as much a part of this story as anything else. When you give money to family, whether as a loan or a gift, put it in writing. Not because you distrust them, not because you want to create a transactional relationship, but because clarity is a form of protection for everyone involved, including them. An unwritten loan is an invisible debt, and invisible debts have a way of becoming invisible leverage, or simply disappearing entirely. A written agreement keeps things honest. And finally, and I say this as a man who waited longer than he should have, who gave benefit of the doubt well past the point where benefit of the doubt was warranted, pay attention to the slow changes, the gradual reduction, the quiet rearrangement of access and affection, the situations that are each individually explainable and together form something that cannot be explained away. Trust what you are seeing. Trust what you know about love and about the people you have loved for their entire lives. Oliver is 9 years old. He comes to my house every other Sunday, and we work on the train layout together, and last month he asked me to teach him how to use the hand plane, which I did, for about 20 careful minutes, with my hands over his. He is precise and patient in a way that moves me. He got that from his mother. Lily is 6. She has decided the rocks on the porch steps need to be reorganized seasonally, and she takes this responsibility very seriously. She has also informed me that when she is older, she would like to have a dog, and that if I also got a dog, the dogs could be friends and visit each other when she visits me. I told her that seemed like an excellent plan. I told her we had plenty of time to figure it out. I meant it.